Deserts. Why deserts? Because I want to, that's why. There are many level tropes we have become accustomed to over our many years of gaming, and everyone has their favorites. This just happens to be mine. While a desert can technically be a cold or even glacial environment, as their defining traits are a lack of precipitation and hostile living conditions, I will be keeping this video to the more iconic variety, the blistering sandscapes we typically associate with the word. As for how I will be judging these entries, I am looking for both gameplay and atmosphere and environment. Levels that weave the desert themes into their mechanics are far more interesting than merely a light brown backdrop to the ordinary gameplay. But enough talk. Time to dig into my top 10 video game deserts. How do you provide a wide array of level themes while restricting your game world to a single city? Well, interdimensional travel is one option. The palaces in Persona 5 offer an intriguing blending of worlds, mixing the mundane with the fantastical. Each dungeon sends the player to a drastically different setting, while still maintaining traces of our world on the other side. After a castle, a museum, and a bank, the Phantom Thieves are caught off guard by the barren wasteland that greets them in Futaba's heart. One miserable and sweaty car ride later, the team arrives at the fourth palace proper. Well, almost. This palace is definitely one of, if not the most unique in its setting, but most of that setting lies outside the dungeon itself. Don't get me wrong, the pyramid is really cool, and I love the way it merges ancient and futuristic motifs with the binary on the wall and other computerized mechanisms. Not to mention the Scientist Sphinx boss and what might be the prettiest dungeon theme in Persona 5. Well, until Royal came out anyway. However, what lands it at number 10 is that most of the actual desert in this level is over with rather quickly. You have the great opening cutscene, a little chase through the abandoned town, and some sand pits in the basement, but the bulk of the dungeon feels more like ancient ruins. Which, it is. Still, an excellent jumping off point for the list. From redheads and stealing hearts to rednecks and stealing cars. Number 9 goes to the Grand Sonora from Grand Theft Auto 5. Most likely based on the Palm Desert or Mojave Desert, Grand Sonora might be the most modern depiction on this list. Maybe. Although it's possible to visit this area as early as gaining control of Franklin, you were most likely introduced to it alongside the first appearance of Trevor. Although minor, this is technically the first proper integration of desert mechanics in gameplay. Though to be fair, driving on sand isn't all that different than driving on dirt, which you've probably been doing for a while now. Still though, it's a much higher concentration here, as even the roads aren't always safe from being slippery. Contrasted with the concrete jungles of Los Santos, the town of Sandy Shores feels almost more desolate and hostile than the undeveloped land surrounding it. Certainly befitting of a 21st century sand city. If you can call this place a city. Grand Sonora may not be the most artistically appealing desert, but it's one of the most down-to-earth depictions on this list. Oh, you want an artistically appealing desert? Wish granted. Gris might be one of the prettiest games I have ever played, and no level in the game quite drives that feeling home more than the first. Gris is all about a world which has lost its color and the journey to restore it one hue at a time. And where better to start than red? Each color you restore brings more and more life back to the world, recontextualizing how you explore it and making for a very unique take on the Metroidvania genre. Fitting then that with only one color in play, the world becomes a desert. The Red Desert, for lack of a better name, is a sight to behold. It's truly breathtaking just how much can be done with only varying shades of a single color. So that's great and all, but how does it play? Fantastically. The gimmick of the Red Desert is the periodic sandstorms that blast through, requiring you to seek shelter lest you be swept off your feet and sent sprawling backwards. Though you can bypass most of it with careful timing and skillful platforming, eventually the storm refuses to let up. Only with this world's power can you brave the winds and finally push onward. Unfortunately, while passing this storm marks the halfway point for the Red level, it's the end of the desert. The second half of Red sees you navigating these old ruins that I can only describe as clockwork steampunk. While the level's short length may land it on the low end of this list, what does exist is a treat for the eyes and the ears. Surprised? I wouldn't blame you if you were expecting Odyssey's Sand Kingdom, but I have my reasons. Tostarena is fine, and I think it's cool to have a Mario level based on Mexican culture of all things, but I just like Dusty Dunes Galaxy more. I have a lot of good to say, but I'll get the nitpicks out of the way first. The aesthetic is just a little too generic for my taste. It doesn't quite feel as beautiful as some of the later deserts we will see, and that's not just me knocking the art style, I assure you. Also, the music is just kinda average. Not bad, but a bit meh. That said, however, where this desert lacks in aesthetics, it makes up for in spades with gameplay. Dusty Dunes stretches the limits of what a desert level is capable of from a creative perspective, helped tremendously by the cartoony art style and metric fuck-tons of suspension of disbelief that Super Mario Galaxy brings to all of its worlds. Using dust devils as human helicopter launch pads, terraforming terrain, and architecture that sinks and rises through the sand are just a few examples. Heck, the very essence of the sand you spend most of your time walking on fundamentally changes your approach to platforming, as what was once a powerful move now becomes a liability. Not to mention the rushing sand streams that send you careening around in whatever direction they please, and the ever-present insta-death quicksand. Overall, I care just a little more about the atmosphere and aesthetics of these entries than the mechanics, but with none of the Mario deserts being of particular visual note, the most fun and creative entry takes the sun-baked cake. Part of my decision-making is based on how much each desert gives the player to explore. But what do I do when that metric isn't consistent? Well, number 6 it is. Besides, in a way, the uncertainty of the desert biomes is actually kind of thematically fitting. Due to Minecraft's environments all being procedurally generated, any one person's experience with these worlds will be different from another. I kinda like that though. It makes me think of the heat-hazed horizons hiding how much you haven't beheld. While MC's deserts don't have heat distortion, they have basically everything else you would expect to see and then some. The desert temples offer interesting dungeons to explore, while the vast sandscapes above ground are certainly a sight to see. Sometimes. The nature of random levels means you won't always get a great experience with them, but other times you'll get the experience of your life. And I know not everybody likes Minecraft's visual style, but I do, so these places look fantastic if you ask me. And if you don't want my opinion, why are you watching my video? Honestly, the most negative thing I can say is that I am thoroughly disappointed the desert biome wasn't represented in Ultimate. Come on, Sakurai, you give us 2 forests and 2 fields, but neglect one of the most visually distinct biomes in the game? I may have called Grand Sonora the most modern, but that doesn't mean it's the least ancient. It's not hard to see why deserts are a popular setting for post-apocalyptic stories. It's easy to believe at face value. The world gets ravaged by some disaster, leaving all but the most resilient life forms to die out. And clearly we aren't as resilient as we like to think we are, Because after our warring fucked up the planet, we just bailed and left it to the androids. Nier Automata's desert zone was the moment that really pulled me into the game, and not just because it was a desert. Fortunately, this area comes early, so if you haven't played it yet, you can watch this with little fear of important spoilers. The desert zone is broken into two major areas, though the line between them is not strictly defined. On the one hand, you have the vast sprawling reach of hills and valleys, which are a blast to slide down, and on the other hand, you have the ruins of what was once a great city. I mean, it might have been great. Automata is a story-focused game, but we don't have all day, so I'll give you the Cliff's Notes. After several skirmishes with the usual robot baddies in the hills, this one bugger gives you the tour to get the fuck back here as you chase him through the city streets.
Why are you running? Why are you running?
Or what's left of the streets. Gameplay-wise, Desert Zone doesn't offer a lot that other areas don't, though sliding down those sandy hills is way more amusing than it has any right to be. Visually, though, this place is breathtaking. Photorealistic deserts tend to be hit or miss for me, number 9 being somewhat of the latter, but Automata nails it. Desert Zone does also have some excellent plot on your first visit, but I don't want to spoil it for those who are late to the party. Oh, and it has the most adorable escort mission in video game history, with an equally cute reward.
2B? Little help here?
Huh? You're the chatty one. Work it out.
Oof.
Mr. Wayne, you gotta tell me how you make two.
Wow, it's getting late. Let's get you home already.
Just as Super Mario Bros. 3 established the trope of desert levels in Mario games, Pokemon's Generation 3 began a trend of almost every Pokemon game having a desert route. There are several to choose from, but I won't waste your time with needless suspense. Number 4 is Route 4. Galaxy's desert may span multiple planets, but Black and White's desert spans multiple timelines. Gen 6 spelled out the multiverse theory as canon lore in neon letters, but one generation before that, Black and White and their respective sequels used it in some of the most creative ways I've seen in the series, and nowhere is that on more glorious display than in the equator of Unova. In Black and White 1, Route 4 is a construction zone, a unique thematic combination that sets it apart from other desert routes in the series, which I'll start to feel a bit samey after a while. Fast forward 2 years to Black and White 2, and things get a lot more interesting. This is where we see the timeline split in two. In Pokemon Black 2, the construction project was completed, and Route 4 is now a pseudo-town. However, the sand ship didn't sail so smoothly in White 2. Excavation dug up remnants of some old ruins, and the project was abandoned to preserve architectural history, leaving Route 4 as a derelict wasteland littered with curious explorers and possibly some looters. But speaking of ancient ruins, we're only halfway done, because we still need to talk about the desert resort. Take a detour on your way to Nimbasa and you'll reach the blistering depths of Unova's wastelands. The desert resort is a densely packed dunescape with a never-ending sandstorm. Stumble your way through the pelting pellets and you'll eventually find the Relic Castle, a quicksand-ridden ancient tomb presumably built by an ancient civilization to worship Volcarona. And on the note of Volcarona, we can't discuss a Pokemon desert without talking about the Pokemon you can find there. Between all sects of the desert, you've got your usual desert suspects like Sandshrew, you got the sentient Fiesta Cactus, and what is basically the poster child for the route, just to name a couple. Oh, and Darumaka, for some reason. I mean, I get it's a fire type in a hot climate, but since when are apes known to hang out in the desert? Apparently some types of chimps do, but Darumaka and Darmanitan are orangutans, which I'm pretty sure have no business being in a desert. And here's a fun tidbit I learned while fact-checking. Depending on how the timeline goes, the developed town of Black 2 now houses Trubbish. Meanwhile, White 2's ruins get... Mincedo? My guess, they used to live here, but when the Lao construction project started, they were scared away and took refuge outside Nimbasa, only now returning. Hence why Black 2 doesn't have them either. finally get to talk about this game. Boasting a name that would make King Asgore blush, Sandy Desert is the reason I'm making this video in the first place. This is the desert level that spawned my love of desert levels. Deserts are known for being hostile and treacherous environments, and no entry better demonstrates that than Sandy Desert. It's not the most dangerous on this list, but it is the most dangerous relative to the game it comes from. The Dog Island isn't what most would call a challenging game, but damn if this place isn't a considerable difficulty spike. Right off the bat, the first thing you'll notice is your fancy new temperature meter. It amazes me that it took until number 3 for heat to become an actual gameplay obstacle in one of these entries. South SD isn't too bad, all things considered. There's an oasis that will refresh your heat meter, and consumable ice cream can save you in a pinch. But you let that meter fill up, and your health bar will effing plummet. I ask you, next to the sun, what is often the most iconic threat of deserts? Yeah, animals, typically of the venomous variety. Having had no experience with status in the last 4 areas, Sandy Desert bombards you with a deadly duo, poison in the south and paralysis in the north. And good luck sneaking up on those snakes when they won't stop spinning. Poison in this game is no joke either. Though not as rapid a killer as heat stroke, all it takes is one bite to put you on the clock. And if you don't have an antidote or enough healing items to get to safety, it's still plenty fatal. But if all that wasn't enough, just wait till you get to the north half. What's better than time pressure? Time pressure with multiple things slowing you down. The obvious culprit here is parahacks, but even without snake bites, you still have quicksand traps to contend with now, and it all becomes a lot harder to dodge with an endless sandstorm obscuring your vision. At least this place doesn't have red cobras. Those bastards are fast! I've heard people who grew up with this game like me say that Sandy Desert legitimately scared them away from the game as a child. Obviously, I don't share that sentiment, but it says a lot about the impact this level had on the player base. Lastly, this place, like many high-ranking deserts, is very pretty. The Dog Island's art style is very cartoony, but Sandy Desert still manages to look quite lovely. And that freaking music! Eat your heart out, Gerudo Valley. No hard feelings, right? All joking aside, I knew from the moment I conceived this video that Gerudo Desert would be high on the list. It was just a question of exactly where, and more importantly, which iteration. I bounced back and forth a bit on this one, but then I got to thinking. We always talk about characters like Link and Zelda as if all their incarnations are one combined entity. So why should a recurring location be treated any different? That's right, this spot goes to Ocarina of Time, Twilight Princess, and Breath of the Wild. Let's tackle them one by one, shall we? Technically speaking, Gerudo Desert, quote-unquote, isn't actually in Ocarina of Time. You have the Gerudo Valley, and beyond that is the Haunted Wasteland, the Desert Colossus, and the Spirit Temple further in. But as I've done several times already, I'm counting that whole area as one iteration of the desert. Maybe not Gerudo Valley, though, it's pretty distinctly different. Semantics aside, I feel that each iteration shines most brightly in a particular regard, and for the N64 version, that regard is atmosphere. We've seen plenty of sandstorms up until now, but the Haunted Wastelands is easily the most oppressive of them all. This is further emphasized by the merging of typical desert mirages with actual paranormal activity. All this leads to a stark shift in tone as you escape the daunting dust and emerge into the Desert Colossus. No, not that Desert Colossus. The serene opening and bright sky are made all the more lovely by the hellstorm you just trudged through to make it here. I don't have a ton to say about the Spirit Temple itself, to be honest. While it's a fantastic final temple, it's not the most impressive desert temple. But speaking of fantastic temples, Twilight Princess's Gerudo Desert is effectively the inverse of Ocarina's. The open-air desert is pretty underwhelming, though it does have some nice music, and I will admit that hook-shotting around P-hats is pretty fun. But this subsection is all about that dungeon. While not my favorite dungeon in the game, that would be Snow Peak Ruins, Arbiter's Grounds is easily my favorite sand dungeon in the franchise. In an ironic contrast to the Spirit Temple, Arbiter's Grounds doubles as Twilight Princess's creepy ghost dungeon, and that is a stellar thematic combination. Once a jail, now abandoned, Arbiter's Grounds houses the reanimated corpses, skeletons, and spirits of Hyrule's most sinister criminals, and was the site of Ganondorf's execution. Well, attempted execution anyway. Blending the desert and undead themes together works just as well mechanically as it does thematically. The sand and spirits are often bigger threats in tandem than individually. Ghoul rats dragging you into quicksand, armies of skeletons rising out of beds of sand, or just scary death spikes rising out instead. Good thing Link can shapeshift, because either form on their own would be screwed in this place. Funny story, actually. Twilight Princess was my first Zelda game back when I was like 10, and when I reached this part, the transition from the overworld into the dungeon was so smooth, I didn't realize I was in a dungeon. I kid you not, it took until after I got the spinner for it to finally click. So Ocarina nails atmosphere, and Twilight Princess nails desert mechanics. That just leaves Breath of the Wild with visuals, right? Well, yes, but it's got a lot more going for it than just that. Obviously a pretty game is going to have a pretty desert, but where Breath of the Wild really excels is, to nobody's surprise, its exploration. While the previous two iterations were pretty linear,
Not that there's anything wrong with that.
Breath of the Wild offers a lot more open land to explore. Though the desert mechanics themselves are limited, it's still worth noting that heat is once again a factor, as is the cold at night. And while you can shield surf on any terrain under the right conditions, sand is certainly one of the most inviting surfaces. Suddenly Nier's not looking so impressive. Oh, right, I should probably address the camel in the room. Yeah, Naboris exists. Okay, look, don't get me wrong. I think Naboris is easily the best divine beast by a mile. But as a desert dungeon, yeah, no, you get a blue ribbon. Most of the deserts on this list have been my favorite part of the games they come from, but number one was the entire reason I bought the game. Frankly, I was never huge on the Assassin's Creed series, but when I learned that the newest game was set in Egypt, I couldn't help myself. A desert level is one thing, but an entire desert game?
Shut up and take my money!
To my relief, ACO did not disappoint. Once again leaning toward the photorealistic side of the spectrum, Origin's depiction of ancient Egypt is downright gorgeous. It's all here. Small dusty villages, sprawling cobbled cities, wide open landscapes and dunes, lightly vegetated dry lands, and oases aplenty. Now, it's important to note that not literally everything is desert in this game, but the vast majority still is. Funnily enough, the actual desert mechanics are extremely limited here, though certain areas are prone to periodic sandstorms. With this being a stealth game, well, when you want it to be, I suspect you could use these sandstorms to your advantage to infiltrate tricky strongholds, but I've never been in the right place in the right time myself. Otherwise though, there isn't much else to claim for sand and desert gameplay mechanics. Even still, Origin's world is one of my favorites to explore. The Dog Island may be the origin point for my love for deserts, but Assassin's Creed Origins was the push I needed to put that love into a video. While earlier entries may capture individual aspects better, no other desert has this much variety. The landscapes, the secrets, the culture, each location has its own unique feeling and tone while still blending seamlessly into the overall world. Some of these locations are downright breathtaking to behold, made all the easier to admire with a literal bird's eye view. Any one of these could be their own entry if they were in a different game. Oh, and as a side note, the Pyramid of Wrath may let you feel like you're somewhere you're not supposed to be, but in the Pyramid of Giza, you can really go somewhere you're definitely not supposed to be. Not exactly sure if I should be patting the game on the back for a glitch, but damn if it isn't fun to explore down here. Never has a game setting alone sold me on an $80 purchase faster than Assassin's Creed Origins. When it comes to video game deserts, Egypt truly is the full package. I've been Atom Bacon, and thank you for watching.